So this week there's a presidential summit between the president of China and the president of the United States. Cyber espionage, cyber warfare is on the agenda. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think that's going to? You write about the new Cold War as a successor to the Cold War.
We spend a fair amount of time talking about the possibility of cyber war, and the sort of conclusion you come to is that there's going to be low-grade fighting, if you will, between countries for a very long time in cyberspace. China is a classic example. By all accounts, America has a good relationship with China. Among other things, they buy our debt, we buy their products. There's a tremendous amount of trade back and forth. It's mutually beneficial in most people's eyes. And yet on the internet, it's a completely different story. Not only are they filtering and censoring the internet, but they, among other things, attacked Google. I mean, who would have thought? Along with many, many other countries. And the unscientific survey of the level of attacks indicates that the majority of the source, 80-ish%, are originating in China for whatever reasons. So you can imagine the following scenario. The Chinese military, and think about Dr. Strangelove, right? Chinese military guy decides to have a little fun. And so he releases a virus into America, and that virus, by the way, mutates in some way that actually causes some physical damage, some bad stuff. And this could happen. So now what we have is in the summit, we have the Chinese premier says, Mr. President, Barack, sorry, we didn't authorize this, and this time I'm telling you the truth. What's the president going to do? I actually mentioned this to President Obama, and he sort of looked at me, oh my God. So you have to actually think about these things, right? You want to think about them before they happen. Now imagine the same scenario, but because of the lack of attribution on the internet, it's really from another country, and they've set it up to blame China. And these poor Chinese people really are not guilty of this. And the internet has some properties. It's hard to attribute where the things come from. It's possible to do a lot of damage, at least digitally. And our systems are not fully protected of it. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, here, for example, how many of you know that the Chinese and others are not inside your corporate or university networks? Raise your hands if you're sure.
No one's sure, yeah. One of the FBI's main jobs now in the Bay Area is to look at this kind of espionage. Jared Cohen, let's get you on this cyber espionage.
Yeah, so let me make a larger point about sort of the cyber attacks that are going on, and then something specific about China. One of the things that we write about in the book and we're very concerned about is we often talk about cyber terrorism and cyber war in one silo and physical world terrorism and physical war in another silo. So people talk about and speculate about what a cyber Pearl Harbor might look like or what a future 9/11 might look like, but we have to sort of resist the urge to silo these things because at the end of the day, what we should really fear is coordinated attacks across both domains or a situation when a cyber attack is so severe it warrants a physical world response.
Jared, one day you announced you had thought about what would be the most terrifying attack is really the combination of these two. Can you kind of give us a scenario where that could occur?
Well, I think it was, once we got mobile coverage back in...
Look, we spent 6 months together, Jared. You must remember some of these things.
Well, no, and I do. I remember after Hurricane Sandy, sort of turned downtown Manhattan into little North Korea, quoted Jon Stewart. I called Eric and I said, this is really terrifying, not because of what natural disasters and hurricanes can do, but this is sort of a forecasting of what a really terrifying terrorist attack could accomplish. So you could imagine a situation where a cyber terrorist attack takes out the electricity of a major city, paving the way for a couple of terrorists to physically go in there and do something terrible undetected. This is a very real scenario.
And we obviously think this is a terrible thing. We're not endorsing it in any way. The possibility, so you sit there and you go, well, how could this happen? After all, these terrorists are operating out of caves. One of the things we talk about in the book is you could imagine sort of a bad alliance between the criminal hacking gangs that exist. You see these periodically online, and they have technical skills and they're after money, and these sort of evil terrorist groups, they could actually form a sort of a super group that could actually be quite serious.
And if I could just go back to China for a minute, not to pick on them, but there's a lot of reasons to these days.
Jared.
Everybody talks about intellectual property theft and what the Chinese are doing with regards to restricting the civil liberties of their population. But there's a larger aspect of what China's doing internationally that has even more serious implications. And the best way to think about this is to understand that most of the world's technological infrastructure has not yet been built. And I'm talking about societies that are autocratic and part of that next 5 billion. So the question is, who's going to build out that infrastructure? There's only so many companies and so many countries that have the ability to do this. So will you have, for instance, Chinese companies that will have all kinds of trapdoors in their technology that lend themselves towards greater surveillance, helping the next generation of autocracies come online? Or will you have companies that are rooted in democratic values and democratic countries being the ones building that out? And this is why we talk about a future sort of cyber code war where you have 2 types of countries with 2 types of companies competing to build out that infrastructure with very serious, lasting implications.
Let's have one more audience question for Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen of Google.
Do you think your visit to North Korea, did you have more impact and accomplish more than Dennis Rodman?
Jared, that's the best question on the entire book tour. Welcome to San Francisco.
We should say, if Dennis Rodman's advocacy gets Ken Bay out of prison, we will be thrilled that Ken is coming home. It will seriously make us question sort of tactics of diplomacy and what works and what doesn't, which is a whole separate conversation. Our visit to North Korea was one of the strangest experiences that Eric and I have ever had. It's really the last frontier in terms of where the internet is basically absent. When we were there, we sort of came to describe the place as a combination of the movie The Truman Show and a Broadway play, in the sense that literally everybody we met was an actor. So Eric had this great idea of, they're not letting us meet any real North Koreans. Let's go to the subway and we'll trick them and we'll find real North Koreans. And so we go into the subway, and everybody sort of seems polite and diligent. We realize they're all actors. They're literally paid by the government to go back and forth between the only 2 functioning subway stops. And presumably when we leave, they stop commuting and do whatever it is that they do. So you may ask, why did we choose to go there? It was not for sort of adventure or anything like that. We chose to go there because you have no shortage of governments and diplomats that are making the case to the North Korean regime of what the sort of alternative political path is that they need to follow. But you have nobody making the technology argument. And what we wanted to do was tell them we wanted to talk about the virtues of a free and open internet and see if they would let us into the country. And it was not intuitive that they would give us visas, let us into the country, and show up at high levels to have that conversation. We talked to them at length. It's not clear whether or not
It's worth saying right up front that there are about 1 million phones in the country, and they're all perfectly capable of a digital data signal, what is known as a HSDPA signal. And all they have to do is turn it on. It's all they have to do. It's just one decision. In that country, there is one person who can make that decision. And he has not made that decision yet. We certainly hope that they, for lots of reasons involving commerce and pressure from China, we hope that they will empower the internet in the country. If they do so, they'll become a safer country for us to deal with.
How can Google improve the lives of people in emerging countries?
So probably the most moving experience that Eric and I had on doing our research for this book, and perhaps in our entire lives, was a trip we took to Pakistan about a year ago. We met a group of women who had been attacked by the Taliban with acid. And we went to visit them, and all of their faces were horribly disfigured. And through no fault of their own, the physical scars that they bear carry a terrible stigma in the physical world that essentially makes it impossible for them to live without sort of being discriminated against or demonized, et cetera. And so when we went to visit all these women, they were all living in a house together. And they all had smartphones. They were learning technical skills. Some of them were starting businesses. And what we realized in talking to them and learning from them is that the internet had essentially given them a second chance at life because their scars were invisible online. One of them had even met a man online who she developed a relationship with and actually led to them getting married. So if you think the internet matters, Try talking to a group of women attacked by the Taliban who were given a second chance of life. It matters a lot.